7 years ago, her son vanished during a family cruise. Now, while walking through a street market in New York City, Grace Whitmore sees a painting. A teenage boy stares back from the canvas. Older, but unmistakably him. Before we dive in, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and let us know in the comments where you're tuning in from. Your support helps us create more deep and gripping stories just for you. There's more to come. The photo had faded just slightly over time, but not enough to dull its impact. It hung in a simple black frame on a pale yellow wall in Grace Whitmore's living room, just above a side table cluttered with unopened mail, a half-burnt candle, and a cold cup of tea. The boy in the photo, maybe 11, maybe 12, smiled into the camera with his hair windblown and his eyes squinting against the sunlight. Behind him, the blue horizon stretched wide and endless, the white railings of the cruise ship gleaming. Grace stood in front of it most mornings. Not long, maybe a minute, sometimes just a breath. It had been 7 years since the day her son Alex disappeared from that ship. 7 years since she'd last heard his voice. 7 years since she'd screamed his name through the narrow hallways and sun-drenched decks, her throat raw and her heart thrashing in her chest as crew members ran in all directions. 7 years of false leads, polite but tired police officers, and the slow disintegration of everything she once called a family. The cruise to Bermuda had been meant as a reset, a fresh start after a rough year. John's work stress, Grace's battle with insomnia, and Alex caught in between, quieter than usual, but always polite, always drawing in that little sketchbook of his. They'd only been on the ship for 2 days. It was late afternoon when Alex said he was going to get ice cream from the deck buffet. He never came back, and nothing, no scream, no splash, no witness, no trace, had ever explained why. Grace's husband, John, had held on for 2 years. He tried therapy, group sessions, denial, then anger, then nothing. He moved out on a rainy Thursday afternoon, left a note on the fridge that said only, "I can't keep drowning in this." He remarried last year. Grace didn't go to the wedding. Now, at 48, Grace lived alone in a modest home in a quiet part of Connecticut. She worked freelance as a floral designer for events and hotels, traveling into New York City when work demanded it. The rest of the time, she tended her small garden, answered emails, and organized old news clippings into neat files labeled with fading sticky notes. Leads, ship crew, Coast Guard statements, witness reports. The police had closed the case 5 years ago. Presumed lost at sea. They said, the language cold and final. There had been no ransom, no sightings, no real clues. Just absence. John had told her to move on. Everyone had. Even her sister, who used to check in weekly, now only sent the occasional text. Thinking of you. Hope you're doing okay. Grace didn't blame them. Grief, she had learned, made people tired. But something deep inside her, call it intuition, or maybe that stubborn, maternal ache, had never let go. She didn't cry as often now, and she didn't pray for miracles. But she watched. She listened. She remembered every detail of that day. Every face. Every sound. Every shadow on the water. And every morning, she looked at that photo and whispered, "I still see you, Alex." Somewhere. Because deep down, beneath the layers of grief and silence, Grace knew the story wasn't over. The house was always quiet after 10 p.m. Grace sat on the edge of the couch, her legs tucked beneath her, a knitted blanket draped over her shoulders. The laptop screen cast a pale glow across the room. She didn't need to see the title of the file. She knew it by heart. Alex Deck Video. She pressed play. The video opened with a rush of wind and the distant hum of ocean waves. Then came the sound of laughter, hers and John's, as the camera panned shakily toward a boy leaning over the ship's railing, pretending to drop a water bottle into the sea. "Mom, look," he shouted. "I'm feeding the ocean gods." Grace's voice behind the camera laughed. "Be careful, Alex." She reached out and paused the frame. There he was, his light brown hair curling slightly from the salt air, his blue t-shirt wrinkled, his eyes bright and mischievous. 11 years old, just a few inches shorter than her, always with that sketch pad under his arm, always trailing behind on museum tours, but racing ahead when there were animals or waves. It had been their first real vacation in years. And the last time she saw him alive, if he was still alive at all. She exhaled slowly and pressed play again. The video ran another 15 seconds before it cut off. She didn't have many recordings left. Just a few clips, scattered photos. The cruise company had given her access to security footage, but the angles were wrong. The hallway cameras had gaps. The outdoor decks were mostly blind spots. One grainy clip caught him heading toward the upper deck, cup in hand. That was it. No more footage. No one remembered seeing him. Not a single passenger had noticed him after that. No body. No personal belongings. No blood. No footprints. No wet clothes. No ransom note. Just a disappearance. Just vanished. He said, "I'm going to get ice cream." And then he was gone. Grace never forgave herself for not going with him. For not insisting. For trusting that he'd return in 5 minutes. Like any normal kid would. She remembered glancing at her watch after 15 minutes. Then 20. And then the slow crawl of panic. The rising tide of dread as she searched the decks. The food court. The arcade room. Then the security office. Then the captain's quarters. By the time the ship's crew initiated a full search, it was too late. The ocean was too big. And the answers, too few. Everyone called her strong in the early days. They meant well. Neighbors dropped off casseroles. Friends organized vigils. Volunteers printed flyers. But no one stayed long. Not really. Strength, she had learned, was just another word for, "You're on your own now." She clicked the video closed and wiped her cheek with the corner of the blanket. Another night, another memory. Another loop through the ache. Pain this deep didn't fade. It just learned how to hide beneath your skin. Until something, anything, cracked it open again. New York City always smelled different in early spring. Like rain-soaked concrete, roasted nuts from street carts, and the faint perfume of tulips blooming in Central Park. Grace had never liked the noise, the chaos, or the constant motion, but it was where the work was. She had a contract that weekend with the Barclay Hotel downtown, a private gallery opening. Rich people, crisp champagne, and floral installations that cost more than her monthly mortgage. She didn't mind. Flowers didn't ask questions. They bloomed, they faded, and they told no lies. That afternoon, after overseeing the final arrangements in the hotel atrium, Grace took the long way back toward the subway. She liked walking through Soho, the cobblestone streets, the pop-up art stalls, the air that always felt like it buzzed with secrets. It was only by chance, or something more, that she took a right turn on a Green Street. That's when she saw it. A narrow alleyway opened into a small cluster of antique vendors and art dealers, their booths tucked beneath colorful awnings. She might have passed them by if not for the sudden, electric pull of her stomach. Her eyes fixed on a single canvas propped against a rusted folding easel. Her breath caught. A teenage boy stood in the painting, backlit by a golden sky. The brushstrokes were soft, textured, warm with life. His hair was longer, more unkempt, and his shoulders broader. But the face was his. Her knees went weak. Grace stepped closer, heart pounding against her ribs like a warning bell. She knelt in front of the painting, as if proximity might break the illusion. The boy's expression was distant but knowing, his eyes familiar in a way that bypassed logic and memory. It was Alex. Older. Maybe 17. Maybe 18. 7 years older. But still Alex. Tears burned her eyes before she even realized they'd come. Her hands trembled as she reached out to touch the edge of the canvas, then stopped herself. She looked around the stall for the artist, or anyone, and spotted a wiry man in a denim apron leaning against a crate, smoking a cigarette. "Excuse me," she said, her voice tight. "This painting, who's the artist?" The man shrugged. "Milo H. Doesn't do first names. Local guy. Sometimes drops his stuff off here on consignment." "Milo H." Grace repeated. "Yeah, doesn't like talking to buyers. You want it?" "Yes," she said too fast. "Yes. I'll take it." She fumbled for her wallet, her fingers barely able to hold the bills. The man didn't ask questions, didn't comment on her shaking hands. Just wrapped the painting in brown paper and passed her a flimsy receipt. The painting now hung above Grace's mantel, replacing the old family photo from the cruise. That photo, of the three of them smiling on the sun-drenched deck, used to be her shrine. Now, it was in a drawer, tucked away like a wound, not ready to scab over. She couldn't stop staring at the canvas. Every line of the boy's jaw, the distant gaze, even the small scar above his eyebrow. It was all too much. Too specific. Too right. And still, no one believed her. Not even John. They met at a coffee shop off I-95, the one halfway between his office in Stamford and her place in New Haven. Grace brought the painting with her, wrapped in a protective sleeve. She barely touched her coffee. "You dragged me out of work for this," he said, eyes flicking from the painting to her face, already irritated. Grace set the canvas gently on the table, unwrapping it like a sacred object. "Look at him, John. Really look. That's Alex. Older, yes, but it's him. You can see it in the eyes." John glanced at it with a sigh, then leaned back, arms crossed. "Grace, he's been gone for 7 years. You've been chasing ghosts for 5 of them." She flinched. "I'm not chasing ghosts. I found this painting randomly in Soho. I wasn't looking. It found me." "You're seeing what you want to see," he said gently, but firmly. "Grief does that. It tricks you. That's not our son." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "You don't know that." John's eyes softened, but there was fatigue behind them. "We can't keep living like this. You're not well, Grace. You need to let him go. Let him go." As if Alex were luggage. A misplaced wallet. Something you could choose to forget. Grace rose from the table, wrapping the painting again with steady hands. "You can choose to stop looking. I can't. I won't." That night, she tried the police again. She brought the painting, printed high-res images, and a side-by-side of Alex from the cruise photos. The desk sergeant glanced at it, unimpressed. "There's no crime here," he said. "No body, no new evidence. The case is closed." "But this is new evidence," she insisted. "If this painting was done from life, then my son is still alive. Or at least, someone saw him. Someone knows something." "You're welcome to file a formal statement," he said in a tired voice, handing her a clipboard. "But it's not going anywhere without more." Grace filled it out anyway. Her handwriting trembled across the page. No one asked follow-up questions. She left the precinct to the sound of a copier running and a vending machine humming, as if her world hadn't just tilted. Back home, she laid the painting flat on the dining table and stared at it until her eyes ached. There had to be something else. A signature. A hint. A clue. Milo H. That was all she had. So, she opened her laptop, pulled out a fresh notepad, and typed the name into every search bar she could find. Grace knew how to research. Long before her life was flowers and funerals, she had worked for a local newspaper. Features, mostly. Weddings, obits, quirky profiles of minor celebrities. She remembered how to dig. How to follow invisible threads through public records and digital shadows. But Milo H. He was a ghost. She started with the obvious. Instagram, DeviantArt, Tumblr, even old art forums. Nothing. No profile pictures. No tags. No website with a contact the artist button. It was bizarre. In a world where even hobbyists had portfolios and social media reels, Milo H. was conspicuously absent. But the man who sold her the painting, the one with the cigarette and the denim apron, had given her one name. Beckett. He'd said it offhandedly. "Most of Milo's stuff comes through Beckett. Guy runs a place in Brooklyn." It was enough. 3 days later, Grace stood outside a narrow storefront in Williamsburg, Brooklyn. The sign above the door read Beckett and Row, Fine Objects and Ephemera. It looked more like a pawn shop for art students than an upscale gallery. Dusty windows, crooked frames, and shelves cluttered with strange, beautiful things that didn't seem to belong together. Inside, the scent of old paper, varnish, and something earthy, maybe tobacco, wrapped around her like a forgotten room in an attic. A man behind the counter glanced up. Tall, early 60s, silver hair tied in a low knot. Thick glasses perched on his nose. He had the careful movements of someone who spent more time with fragile objects than people. "You Beckett?" Grace asked, voice steady. "I might be," he said, not looking up. "Depends who's asking." She unwrapped the painting, placed it gently on the counter between them. "Where did you get this?" she asked. The man's hands paused mid-motion. He set down a glass paperweight and finally looked at her. "Milo's work," he said. "That's one of his. I need to speak with him." Beckett studied her, really studied her now. The way her fingers gripped the edge of the canvas, white-knuckled. The tremor in her voice, she was trying to hide. Something in his expression shifted. He doesn't do visitors. This is my son, she said quietly. He went missing 7 years ago. And this painting, was done after that. I need to find him. Please. A long silence stretched between them. The soft ticking of an old clock was the only sound. I don't know much about him, Beckett finally said. He drops paintings off. No phone number, no address. Pays in cash. Always wears a hood. Doesn't talk. But you've seen his face. Once, Beckett nodded. Maybe twice. Young guy. Early 20s, maybe. But that's it. Do you know where he lives? Where he paints? Beckett hesitated. He mentioned a warehouse once. Said he worked out a place in Red Hook. Didn't say more. Grace's heart surged. A warehouse. A neighborhood. A direction. She folded the painting back into its protective wrap and met Beckett's eyes. Then that's where I start. Beckett poured himself a glass of water, hands slower than they needed to be, stalling. Grace waited in silence, gripping the edge of the counter like it was the only thing keeping her upright. I'm not supposed to tell anyone, he said finally, eyes on the water glass instead of her. He made that clear. Grace leaned in. I'm not anyone. I'm his mother. The words cracked out of her, raw and undisguised. She hadn't said them aloud in years, not like that. Not since the police had quietly labeled Alex's case as presumed dead. Not since John had told her she was torturing herself with hope. But here it was. Truth. Undeniable. Beckett looked up. His eyes softened, lips pressing into a thin, reluctant line. I never knew his full story, he said. Didn't even know his name wasn't Milo. But the kid, he's not normal. Not in a bad way. Just like someone who's lived too many lives for his age. Grace felt her throat tighten. Where is he? She asked, quieter now. Beckett sighed, ran a hand through his hair, then disappeared into a back room. When he returned, he held a small, battered notebook. Pages filled with scribbled names, addresses, delivery notes. He flipped through, then slid the open book across the counter. A smudged pencil note read, Milo, drop 4/11, Greystone Farm, near Anson, New York. Grace stared at the words, committing them to memory. It's some sort of artist co-op, Beckett said. Old farmland, turned into a commune. No website, no phones. Off the grid. Milo said he was painting there for the season. She exhaled. How do I get there? Beckett paused, then pulled a worn map from beneath the counter. He circled a rough area in upstate New York, deep in the hills. You'll need 4-wheel drive. Maybe snow tires, he said. This time of year, it's a mess. I'll manage, Grace said, already calculating routes in her head. Thank you. She started to turn, but Beckett held up a hand. I don't know what you're hoping to find, he said quietly. Even if it is him, people change. They build walls, bury their past. Grace nodded. Her voice trembled, but her spine stayed straight. So do mothers. Until something breaks through. Outside, the Brooklyn wind bit at her cheeks, but she barely noticed. She stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, staring down at the notebook copy she had made in her phone. Greystone Farm. A place. A lead. A beginning. She didn't call John. Didn't alert the police. They'd only try to stop her. She went home, packed a bag with warm clothes, thermals, boots, and printed copies of Alex's childhood photos, just in case. She placed the painting back in its sleeve and slid it into the back of her car. The next morning, before the sun had fully risen, Grace set her GPS, turned the key, and drove north, into the cold, into the mountains, into the unknown. The road twisted for miles, flanked by skeletal trees and hills crusted with ice. Cell service had disappeared an hour ago, and Grace had only the printed map and her gut to guide her now. When she finally pulled up to the long gravel drive that wound toward Greystone Farm, it felt like entering another world. It wasn't a farm in the traditional sense. No fields, no tractors. More like a scattered commune of old stone buildings and timber cabins, tucked into the fold of the hills like secrets. Smoke curled from chimneys. Chickens pecked near a broken-down fence. Someone chopped wood in the distance. Grace stepped out of the car, boots crunching over frosted gravel. Her breath curled in the air. A young woman with a wool shawl draped over her shoulders walked toward her. Freckled, red-cheeked, cautious. "You're here for the retreat?" the woman asked gently. I'm looking for someone, Grace said. He goes by Milo H. I think he's staying here. The girl blinked, then nodded too quickly. Milo's not here right now. He went into town. For supplies. Town? Grace asked. Which town? The girl hesitated. Nearest one is Addison. About 30 miles south. Grace tried to read her face, but it was practiced neutrality, the kind born from privacy as a way of life. When will he be back? Hard to say, the girl replied. Could be a day or two. There was an uncomfortable pause before she added, You're welcome to stay the night. We have guest cabins. Simple but warm. Grace agreed, though every instinct screamed she was being handled. Still she was in, and she wasn't going to risk being asked to leave. The guest cabin was rustic, but cozy. Wood walls, a potbelly stove, a single bed with a thick wool blanket. No locks, no mirrors, no clocks. She ate dinner in silence with the community, around a long table in a converted barn strung with yellowing paper lanterns. Everyone was kind, but overly so. Their eyes lingered too long, their smiles a little too practiced. As the sun sank into the woods, Grace felt a creeping unease settle in her chest. She kept her expression calm, but her fingers itched to record details. The layout of the farm, faces at the table, the way people glanced toward one specific building every time the wind howled. She returned to her cabin early, claimed exhaustion, and waited. At midnight, she slipped out of bed. The cold floor bit her feet. She crept to the window and parted the curtain just an inch. For a long moment, there was only fog. Then movement. A silhouette in the window of the main farmhouse. A teenager. Dark hair, lean frame, standing motionless with one hand resting on the glass. Watching. Her breath caught in her throat. Alex? It was impossible to tell, but her body reacted before logic did. Her heart pounding, her vision blurring. She whispered his name into the silence. The figure tilted his head, and then, just as suddenly, was gone. Disappeared deeper into the house. Grace didn't sleep. Not a second. By dawn, her mind was already racing through possibilities. If they were hiding him, why? And what exactly was this place pretending to be? By morning, the mist still clung to the trees like a veil, as if the night hadn't quite ended. Grace stood outside her cabin, mug of weak herbal tea in her hands, her eyes fixed on the farmhouse. The figure in the window haunted her, not just his shape, but the way he had tilted his head, the precise tilt Alex used to do when puzzled. But it couldn't be him. Or could it? She needed answers. Waiting would get her nowhere. She approached the main house with calm, 4 steps. The girl from yesterday, her name was Lark, she'd learned, stood on the porch, pulling carrots from a crate. Grace tried to sound casual. I'd love to help out while I wait for Milo, she said, her voice measured. You folks could use the hands, I imagine. Lark smiled, too quickly again, and nodded. Sure. We can use help in the kitchen or the garden. Depends what you're comfortable with. Anywhere is fine. That's how Grace found herself folding towels in a side room near the farmhouse kitchen. But her eyes scanned every corridor, every shadow, every set of footsteps passing the door. Then she heard it. A voice. Male. Young. She stepped out casually, following the sound. The hallway led to the back of the house, where a narrow corridor opened onto a covered porch. A boy stood there, turning over a weathered clay pot in his hands. Tall, maybe 15 or 16. Dark wavy hair, high cheekbones, and his profile. For a second, Grace forgot to breathe. It was Alex. Older, yes. His baby fat was gone, but the eyes, the jaw, even the little scar near his eyebrow. She took a step forward. Alex, she whispered, barely audible. The boy turned. His expression shuddered instantly. What did you say? Grace froze. Her heart screamed, but she steadied her voice. Sorry. I thought you looked like someone I knew. My son. He looked at her strangely. Suspicious. Wary. And then, flatly, I'm not Alex. My name's Eli. Eli. She repeated it, tasting the lie in it. He turned to leave. Wait, please, Grace said softly. I didn't mean to scare you. I lost my son a long time ago. You just reminded me of him. I'm sorry, he said, barely above a whisper. His tone was mechanical, practiced. Like he'd said, I'm sorry, many times to many people for reasons he never fully understood. Grace stepped closer. Her throat burned. Can I ask you something? He hesitated. Do you remember anything before this place? He stared at her like she'd just spoken in a foreign language. Then he shook his head. I've always been here. She knew it wasn't true. It was in the way he said it, too fast, too final. Then footsteps. Heavy ones. A man appeared behind Eli. Tall, broad-shouldered, beard down to his collarbone. His eyes locked on Grace, and for a moment, nothing moved. You're needed in the barn, he said to the boy. Eli nodded quickly, avoiding her gaze, and disappeared down the hall. Grace stood rooted to the spot. The man kept staring. Cold. Calculating. You're not here for a retreat, are you? He asked flatly. Grace smiled weakly. Just looking for peace. The man didn't blink. Then he turned and walked away. But Grace had seen enough. The boy was alive, and he was afraid. The sun had dipped low by the time Grace found the painting. She had stayed after supper, helping Lar clean the communal kitchen, pretending to laugh at stories she couldn't hear. Her eyes were everywhere. On the walls, on the doors, on the paths leading between the barns. She was looking for anything. Anything that could anchor her instinct in something real. The house had a narrow corridor on the second floor, lined with framed artworks. Most of them were nature scenes. Rolling hills, tangled trees, soft pastels of sunsets. But then she saw it. At the far end, tucked behind a small bookshelf, was a portrait. Bold, raw strokes. Eyes staring off to the left, thoughtful, detached. The boy's head tilted slightly to the side. Grace's breath hitched. It was the same boy she'd seen on the porch. Only, here, in paint, his soul was more present than it had been in person. There was a softness in the eyes, a questioning sadness. She stepped closer. Underneath, scratched faintly in the corner of the canvas, was a name. Alex W. The world stopped. She blinked once. Twice. No one at the commune had mentioned that name. Her hands trembled as she leaned in, heart pounding in her ears. She fumbled in her purse, pulled out her phone, and silently took a photo. Then a second, a third, angles, detail, signature. She moved quickly, instinctively. A creak behind her. She froze, then slowly turned. No one. Just an open window letting in the chill of dusk. The realization hit her like a wave. The boy Eli didn't remember who he was, or was being made to forget. Conditioned. Coerced. His quiet voice, the flat apology, the practiced replies, they weren't from a place of safety. Grace stepped closer, her fingers hovering over the frame. The impulse was wild, reckless, but she had to act. She slid the frame gently off its hook. For a moment, the house held its breath with her. Then she slipped the painting under her coat, walked quickly to the back stairwell, and made her way outside. She didn't stop until she reached the rented cabin a mile down the hill. Only then did she unwrap the canvas fully and lay across the bed. Alex W. Not Milo H. The boy wasn't just the subject. He was the artist. That's why the painting in Soho had pulled her in. It hadn't been just a portrait of her son. It had been by him. And whoever had given him that false name, Eli, whoever had locked his memories away, had let one detail slip. She stared at the signature, tears brimming. Alex. Her son. Somewhere behind the numb face and strange name, he was still in there. And now, she had proof. She picked up the phone. For a second, she considered calling the police again, but her thumb hovered. No, they had dismissed her before, treated her like a grieving woman seeing ghosts. This time, she would find out the truth herself. She would go deeper into the world that had taken her son, and she wouldn't leave until he remembered who he really was. Grace stepped off the train into the noisy hum of New York City. The weight of the stolen painting pressed carefully inside her tote bag. The air was heavy with the scent of rain and asphalt, and a familiar nervous energy prickled beneath her skin. This was the city where she'd first caught the glimmer of hope, where the painting of her son had appeared like a ghost in a street market. Her first stop was Beckett's small gallery in Brooklyn. The door chimed as she entered, and the man looked up, his usual guarded expression softening just a little when he saw her. Grace, he said, surprised. You're back early. She held up the photo on her phone, her voice steady but urgent. Look at this. Another painting from the commune, signed Alex W. Not Milo. This boy's real name is Alex. Beckett frowned, studying the image. I didn't know about this one. Milo's private works rarely leave the commune. How did you get it? Grace hesitated. Let's just say I didn't exactly ask permission. The dealer rubbed his chin, clearly impressed but cautious. This changes things. Milo's a mystery to everyone. No one knows much. And that commune, they don't like outsiders. Exactly why I need help, Grace said, her voice low but resolute. I need someone who can dig deeper. Later that afternoon, Grace dialed Elliot's number. Her fingers trembled as the phone rang. Elliot James, the investigative journalist. She helped him with research and formatting for his last book. Grace? It's been a long time. Elliot's voice came through, steady and calm. She took a deep breath. Elliot, I need your help. It's about Alex. I found something new. Something that could change everything. There was a brief pause. Tell me everything, he said. For the next hour, she recounted the story. Her son's disappearance, the painting in Soho, the commune, the second portrait signed Alex W. She shared her doubts about the boy's true identity and her fear that someone was erasing her son's past. When she finished, Elliot was silent for a moment. Then he said, Grace, this is huge. If what you say is true, it's not just a missing persons case anymore. It's a story about control, about erasure. I want in. A surge of relief washed over her. For the first time in years, she wasn't alone in this fight. We'll meet tomorrow, Elliot added. I want to see that painting, and I want all the details. Grace hung up, heart pounding but steady. She was one step closer. The next morning, Grace met Elliot James at a small cafe in Brooklyn, the hum of the city outside contrasting with the quiet urgency between them. Over coffee, she handed him the photographs of the paintings and detailed notes from her visit to the commune. Elliot studied everything intently, his sharp eyes searching for connections. All right, Grace, Elliot said, leaning back. This Milo H. guy, he's more than just an artist. I found that the commune is connected to a so-called therapeutic retreat that's been under the radar for years. The authorities have had complaints, but little evidence to act on. Grace's heart sank, but her resolve only hardened. What kind of complaints? Elliot's voice dropped. Disappearance of minors, psychological manipulation, forced identity, erasure. Several families reported their children missing after sending them to these retreats. Grace swallowed hard. The word identity, erasure, hit her like a punch, exactly what she feared had happened to Alex. Do you think the commune is part of this? She asked, voice barely a whisper. I'm almost certain, Elliot replied. I've traced some of the commune's members to a group that markets itself as healing trauma through isolation and art. But reports suggest it's more cult-like than therapeutic. The kids are renamed, their past scrubbed, and the leaders have near-complete control. Grace's fists clenched. 7 years of pain, of searching alone, and now this dark underbelly was coming to light. Have you found anything about Milo's real identity? She pressed. Elliot shook his head. Not yet. No records, no social media footprint. But I'm digging into property records and local reports. If this farm is a front, it should leave a trail. They spent hours piecing together fragments from old news reports, anonymous tips, and social service complaints. Grace shared every memory she had of Alex, hoping some detail might help Elliot break the case. Grace, Elliot said carefully, your intuition is what's kept you going, and it's what will help us expose this. Yet, even with new leads, a heavy silence hung over the conversation, one filled with frustration at the system's failure to protect children like Alex. As they wrapped up, Elliot warned, this won't be easy. If they're willing to erase identities, they won't let us get close without a fight. We need to prepare. Grace nodded, her eyes steely. I've been ready for years. The phone call came late that evening. Grace sat alone in her small apartment, the city lights flickering outside her window, when Elliot's voice crackled through the line. Grace, I've confirmed something. You need to hear this. Her heart pounded. What is it? Elliot took a breath. Alex wasn't originally part of the commune. According to local records and some eyewitness accounts, he was found by members of the commune after a violent storm near the shore, about a week after he disappeared from the cruise. Grace's hands trembled. Found? How? He was alone on the beach, disoriented, with a severe head injury. No memory of who he was, no ID, nothing. They brought him to the farm, took him in, unofficially adopted him. Grace's mind raced back to the last words she heard him say on the ship. "I'm going for ice cream." How could he have drifted so far, so lost? Elliot continued, voice heavy with disbelief. "The commune has this disturbing practice they call cleansing, a process where they suppress or erase memories of the outside world. They believe it helps newcomers start fresh, free from trauma." Grace's throat tightened. "So, they took him in, but then wiped his memory? Made him forget his family?" "Yes. They justified it as healing. But it's manipulation, psychological control. Alex's real identity was buried under their rules and rituals." Tears welled in Grace's eyes, blurring the skyline outside. For 7 years, she had lived with unbearable uncertainty, hoping and fearing in equal measure. Now the truth settled over her like a cold shadow. Elliot's voice softened. "I've spoken to former members who escaped. They told me about the cleansing ceremonies, how they isolate the kids, force them into silence, and rename them. It's how the commune keeps control." Grace closed her eyes, recalling the boy she had seen on the farm. The way he looked at her with confusion, the flickers of fear beneath his calm facade. He had been there all along, trapped by the very people who claimed to protect him. "We need to get him out," Grace whispered. "Before it's too late." Elliot agreed. "I'm gathering more evidence, but we have to be careful. The commune won't let us take him easily." Grace's hands shook as she stood at the entrance to the commune's farm once again. This time, she wasn't alone. Behind her, Elliot, the investigative journalist, and 2 plainclothes police detectives waited quietly, their faces grim but determined. The air was heavy with tension, thick like the humid summer haze, and every step felt like walking deeper into a long-buried nightmare. As they crossed the threshold, Grace's eyes searched for Alex, and then she saw him, a boy sitting quietly under the sprawling branches of an old oak tree, staring off into the distance with a vacant expression that made her heart ache. "Alex," she whispered, voice barely steady. His head snapped up. His eyes widened, confused and frightened. "Oh, who are you?" he asked, his voice uncertain and cautious. "It's me, sweetheart." "Mom," she said, tears streaming down her cheeks. For a moment, the boy froze, unsure. Then a flicker of recognition passed through his eyes. Something inside him shifted, a crack in the wall of silence and forgetfulness. Elliot stepped forward gently. "We're here to help you," he said softly. "You've been living with people who've hidden the truth from you." The police officers exchanged nods and carefully approached, prepared to take statements and begin the formal process. Inside the farmhouse, the commune leaders sat stiffly as Grace confronted them, accusing them of kidnapping, illegal detainment, and psychological abuse. "This is over," she said firmly. "You cannot keep my son, or any child, trapped under your control." The leaders denied everything at first, their voices slick with practiced calm. But the evidence, photos, testimonies, and the paintings, piled against them like stones breaking down a dam. Days later, the first court hearing began. The prosecution laid out the disturbing practices of the commune, how children were taken without consent, subjected to cleansing rituals to erase their identities, and manipulated into silence. Alex sat beside Grace, still uncertain, but beginning to reclaim fragments of his past. During the trial, moments came when his eyes clouded with confusion, then sparked with flashes of memory. A birthday cake, the sound of waves against the ship, his mother's voice calling him to ice cream. Grace squeezed his hand, a silent promise that she would never give up. The courtroom was filled with journalists, neighbors, and supporters who had followed the story. The tension was palpable, every revelation unfolding like a wound exposed to the light. The commune's leaders faced harsh scrutiny, their control slipping away under the weight of the truth. For Grace, it was a painful but necessary battle, a fight not just for justice, but for the chance to heal the fractures in her family and in Alex's mind. As the trial continued, Grace vowed that no child would ever suffer in silence again, and that the memories of lost years would not be buried forever. The sterile white walls of the therapy room seemed to close in around Alex, but Grace stayed firmly by his side. For the first time in 7 years, he was sitting in a place meant to heal, not hide. Alex was 18 now, a young man caught between worlds, physically grown but emotionally adrift. His eyes often glazed over during sessions, retreating into a fog of lost memories and guarded silence. The therapist, a calm woman named Dr. Monroe, spoke gently about trauma and recovery, but Alex's defenses were thick. Every question felt like a barrier he didn't want to cross. Grace watched quietly from the corner. She didn't push him to remember or to feel something he wasn't ready for. She only offered steady presence, a quiet reassurance that she was there, no matter how long it took. "I'm not angry," Alex said one day, a voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know who I am, or who I'm supposed to be." Grace reached out, hesitating before placing her hand over his. "You're still you, Alex. We'll find your way together." Days turned into weeks. Slowly, moments began to crack through the numbness. A smile flickered when Grace played an old video of his 10th birthday. Balloons, laughter, his face lighting up as he blew out candles. They spent afternoons in the park, where Alex's laughter came easier, and evenings talking quietly over simple dinners, rebuilding trust one small step at a time. Grace never forced him to relive the pain. Instead, she created space for hope, filling the silences with gentle encouragement. Sometimes, when he retreated into himself, she remembered the boy who had run off for ice cream on a cruise and never come back. She held onto the memory fiercely, believing that Alex's true self was still inside, waiting to be found. Their journey was far from over. Some days were harder than others, with shadows of fear and confusion clouding Alex's eyes. But Grace was patient. She learned to listen with her heart, to be a quiet anchor in his storm. "We'll get there," she told him softly one evening as the sun set, casting long shadows across the room. One day at a time. And in that fragile promise, a new chapter began, not one erased by loss or silence, but written with courage, love, and the slow, steady reclaiming of a life nearly stolen away. A year had passed since the storm of revelations and courtroom battles. The once fractured threads of Grace and Alex's lives were slowly weaving back together into a fragile, yet resilient tapestry. Alex now lived with Grace in the modest Connecticut home, where years of waiting and unanswered questions had once hung heavy in the air. The house felt different now, softer, quieter, yet filled with a cautious kind of hope. He had enrolled in a community art college nearby, dedicating himself to painting. It was his language now, a way to speak the things he couldn't yet say in words. Grace watched him often, marveling at how the boy she almost lost was beginning to find himself through color and brushstroke. One afternoon, as sunlight streamed through the kitchen window, Grace stood in the living room, her gaze fixed on the canvas hanging on the wall. The very painting that had changed everything. The portrait she had discovered in the street market all those months ago. The one that had sparked the search for her son. But now, something was different. In the lower corner of the canvas, a new signature gleamed faintly but clearly. Alex W. Remembering. Grace's breath caught. Alex stood beside her, watching her reaction quietly. "That's your work?" she asked softly. He nodded, a small, uncertain smile touching his lips. "I added it a few weeks ago. It's my way of owning the past, I guess. Remembering who I was, and who I want to be." The painting, once a mysterious clue and a painful mystery, had transformed into a symbol of survival and rebirth. Grace stepped closer, her hand reaching out to brush the frame gently. "It's beautiful, just like you." Alex looked away, humbled but hopeful. The weight of years hadn't lifted completely, but the burden was lighter now, shared between mother and son. In the quiet that followed, the house seemed to breathe with them, a place no longer defined by loss but by the slow, steady work of healing. Grace smiled, her heart swelling with a fierce, protective love that had carried her through the darkest days. "We're still here," she said, "still fighting, still remembering." And in that moment, framed by the painting on their wall and the promise of tomorrow, they both knew the journey was far from over. But now, they faced it together,